Okay, so it's time for the introduction. So I literally just read this, but at the end of the recording, realized that the audio wasn't being captured. So I've got this video recording of me and no audio, which I'm sure would be amazing for someone, but super annoying. So it's Friday afternoon right here, and that well and truly pissed me off because it has prevented me from getting to beer o'clock. Anyway, here we go. So, just as a reminder, I'm reading my book, True Perspective Why Leading with Truth Always Wins. While this might seem like a completely narcissistic exercise, actually, um, it's more because I'm interested in reading my own book. It's the first time I would have read it without the lens of I need to publish this and smash it out the door. So I'm actually reading it interested and with curiosity. Secondly, I want to upload this as an audio recording for people that are interested in listening to the book, not reading it. So it will be uploaded as a podcast so you can access it. Um, Thirdly, I think there's something cool about listening to an author read their own book, but also provide commentary and thoughts on what they've written. Now, it's been 2 years since I wrote this book, so my perspective has most likely changed. And so, yeah, you'll find out whether I still believe why that leading with truth always wins. Spoiler alert, I sort of do, but of course, my perspective has changed. Okay, so here it goes. I'm going to read a little bit quickly because I literally just finished reading this, so there's a sense of urgency now. Anywho, Brett Whiteley, a master of translating, excuse me, Brett Whiteley, a master of translating life into art, is one of my favourite artists of all time. I was a keen art student at high school and spent many hours studying Whiteley's work. While doing so, I stumbled across the following statement: change equals death. At first glance, it appears to be somewhat morbid and potentially a byproduct of his well-documented drug abuse, which sadly ended up killing him. Upon deeper reflection, the simplicity of this insight explains why change continues to be the greatest instigator of fear and resistance in our lives. With all change comes death at one point or another. The challenge for us all is that when someone or something dies, that is, ceases to exist, be it a person, job, relationship, or idea, we struggle to see beyond the starkness of its end. We aren't taught to embrace the unknown change that necessarily stems from the death of someone or something, despite it being a fundamental part of life. We aren't taught how to consider multiple perspectives before formulating what we deem to be true. In organisations, we're constantly facing change. Through Brett Whiteley's artistic lens, this change represents death, and with that comes the need to accept and let go. I'd like to build upon Whiteley's perspective by adding life into the equation. Thus, change equals death equals life. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work describes the 5 stages of grief, since adapted by John Fisher and relabeled as the organisational change curve. While originally inspired by the work with terminally ill patients, the applicability of this model to help people accept and work through changes within an organisational context has proven to be very powerful. The core purpose of this work is to help people understand what they are feeling in response to a significant change in their lives, to accept it and make it okay. By understanding these feelings, we make sense of our experience. This gives us perspective. When we do this consciously, it enables us to take our experience and generalize it across various contexts. It enables us to empathize with others more powerfully, express ourselves more honestly, and consciously create the experience we want others to have of us. Why is it that we resist change so fiercely? The simple answer: it's hard and it hurts. Personal change involves shedding parts of our identity like a snake sheds its skin. This kind of transformation requires us to be out with the old before we can be in with the new, and we aren't always ready for the former. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky work Tversky's work on loss aversion and behavioral economics shows that the loss of satisfaction associated with losing $100 is greater than the gain in satisfaction associated with winning. We find letting things go to be harder than we find receiving to be easy. Have you ever noticed what happens when your boss decides to restrict access to stationery, take away the weekly fruit delivery, or demand that people in the office, now that COVID has run its course, demand that people be in the office now that COVID has run its course? The moaning and groaning it creates, not to mention the loss in productivity, is far greater than the positive effect created when the benefits were first introduced. I'll just show you the graph here that's in the book. That is the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and adapted change curve. So it just shows you the different stages that you go through when you're facing change or grief, as it was originally researched. Okay. Like many of you right now, and forever and always, I'm facing death in my family, a change in my work, and a transition in my personal life. While it never gets easier, embracing death, change, and transition as part of life enables me to stay curious and open. The comfort-seeking aspect of me so desperately wants everything to be stable, constant, without change. This, we all know, is a luxury that cannot be granted in a universe that is infinitely expanding. Aside from behaviours, we all seek change and progress. We just find it difficult to acknowledge our inevitable fate, death. The sooner we stop seeking constant stability, the better. The reconciliation of death, moving on, and letting go will be far less confronting, and we might find that managing change will be a less challenging process too. To have true perspective is to face your fear, to challenge yourself to look beyond that which seems impossible, inevitable, or insurmountable. What if? These two words together are some of the most powerful in the English language. They can be incredibly damaging as a tool that disables us from trying anything new. When used in combination with fear, such as, what if I share my ideas and they get rejected? What if I declare my love and it's not reciprocated? Or, what if they don't accept my apology? Equally, they can be incredibly useful in creating momentum and generating new possibilities. What if, after all these years, I reconnect and we can finally see past our differences? What if I take a chance to start my own business and it works? Or, what if I choose to lead with courage and people follow? These two words are so powerful because they represent the perspective you choose. They are a focal point for your energy and intention. The annoying and elegant thing about these two words is that they represent infinite possibility. The what-if game goes forever in an infinite loop of nothingness until you reach the point of action or inaction. It's an exploratory question that enables you to generate perspective. Like the number of pixels that make up an image, the more you have, the truer the resolution. True perspective can be achieved by simply generating as many scenarios as you can. At some point, the truth you're seeking will become clear. When Dad asked, "What if this is it? What if I'm about to die?" he shared his experience of being overwhelmed with love and acceptance. He kept saying, "I forgive my brother, my mother, and all of my enemies, if I had any." It was wonderful to see someone who had experienced so much emotional and physical pain let go of the resentment that had been plaguing him for years. He'd been suffering from terminal bowel cancer for 5 years, and was now at the very pointy end of his journey. The thing is, for as long as I can remember, Dad had always had a strained relationship with his brother and his mum. How they saw the world and the perspectives they chose to hold on to were irreconcilable. When Dad's mum passed away at 97, Dad chose not to attend her funeral. I remember sitting there, listening to Dad's brother Bruce read Nan's eulogy, wondering how Dad couldn't bring himself to pay his respects, regardless of what had happened in the past. I also wondered what that would do to him emotionally, and how this emotional disturbance might create any physical distress for him. He chose to forgive and forget, but chose not to pay his respects after she passed. I recall discussing this with Dad. I understood his reasoning and logic, but I couldn't agree with his perspective. Through Dad's eyes, he chose to disconnect completely, to preserve his feelings of reconciliation. His perspective was limited to his own experience and failed to incorporate his mother, his brother, his wife, his kids, and his friends. His blinkered view prevented him from seeing alternative perspectives, leading to alienation, judgment, hurt feelings, broken relationships, and open wounds. This is an example of what happens when one's perspective is limited. There is nothing true about it, except for pain and suffering. When we knew Dad's illness was terminal, I called Bruce to let him know. Dad had decided years ago that he didn't want anything to do with his mother or brother, despite their attempts to make contact. I'd created opportunities for them to connect over the years, but every time I brought it up with Dad, he glared at me with disdain. He would get angry and agitated at me for bringing it up, a real conversation killer. I can understand that if you have bad blood with someone, they might not be somebody you want to spend time with. You might prefer to spend time with someone who you know loves and values you. When it comes to family, there is an added layer of complexity, one that can't be explained but can only be felt. I could tell that Dad was carrying a bunch of hurt around with him, and his brother and his forgiveness felt more like a spiteful resolve than true resolution, very similar to the reconciliation he attained for himself with his mum. After all, how can you be fully resolved in a relationship when the other person is still hurting and feeling unresolved? Feeling the timing was right in Dad's final few days, I made a call to Bruce. I let him know that Dad had mentioned him a couple of times in recent conversations, and should he want to reach out, now would be the time. Bruce took a pause and said, I don't know, Joe. I'll have to think about it. He was most likely asking himself at that moment, what if I make the call and he rejects me? He doesn't want to talk to me or simply doesn't answer. What if speaking with him triggers sadness, anger, anxiety, or depression? What if I don't call him? Will I regret it? 2 days later, I got a call from Dad. The first thing he said was, I've got something important to tell you, my son. I received a call from Bruce today, and it was wonderful. We spoke for 40 minutes about love and forgiveness, and we even laughed. I just wanted to say thank you for connecting us. It had been 15 years since he and Bruce had last spoken. There was a lot of hurt that existed between them, but how wonderful it was they got to share that connection again before Dad finally died. Bruce is Dad's older brother, and at 85 is likely living out his final 15 years of life. He lives his final years knowing that he took the step to call his brother and make amends before the opportunity was gone, to put his mind and heart to rest after all those years. In a single moment, a choice, he changed his perspective on his brother forever, frozen in the timelessness of resolve. What if I didn't call Bruce because I didn't want to ruffle anyone's feathers? What if Bruce didn't want to call Dad because he feared the reaction? What if Dad didn't answer his call because it was an unknown number? Or what if the love and forgiveness Dad felt was ruined by the call from Bruce? After exploring all of these questions and perspectives, I came back to the one perspective that I know serves me well, to lead with the truth. The only truth I can lead with is mine, so I decided to call Bruce to give him the option of connecting with Dad. I did this because despite all the what-if negative outcomes that I'd explored, my hope for love to prevail was still there. I was serving myself when I connected Bruce and Dad because it was important to me that they speak again. What if I didn't bother to try to connect them again? Well, it would have been a regret. It would have been thrown onto that ever-increasing pile of intentions that never saw action. It would have been an intention that had no means of progressing to action, forever stuck in an emotional wasteland of fear and emptiness. The link to leadership. We've all experienced moments of clarity in our perspective on what needs to happen next. It's filled with uncertainty and purpose. And then indulged in the what-if game. Our perspective becomes tarnished and sometimes biased toward the negative. We fuel our imaginations and worst-case scenarios. Our inactivity fuels our uncertainty to the point that we are stopped in our tracks, victims of our intelligence, trapped by our inability to move forward with courage. I want to make an explicit point here about leadership. Up to this point in the book, I've shared mainly personal experiences that, while challenging or significant, you might be wondering how these experiences relate to leadership. This book is about how leading with the truth always wins. In the previous example, both my actions and Bruce's actions were about personal leadership. We both consciously chose to lead with courage and truth. The consequence was positive and far-reaching. On the other hand, when Dad chose to disconnect from his relationship with his mum, the consequence was wholly negative and far-reaching. Leadership is not just about doing what's right for you, it's doing what's right for you and exploring how you are being experienced by the people around you. If this exploration is reflected back to you as largely negative, then I'd suggest rethinking your approach. If you're still struggling to understand the link between your personal life and how you show up as a leader at work, ask yourself, would you follow a leader who only serves themselves without considering the impact, negative or otherwise, on the people around them? Well, I certainly wouldn't. I hope that when Dad took his second to last breath and he started to flick through his highlight reel, it was filled with loving memories of his brother Bruce, and he died feeling resolved with that relationship. The lesson I want all of us to take from this experience is that, like it or not, relationships are all we have once our bodies decide to give up. Money, achievements, ambitions, projects, and possessions all fade away into the background. Our perspective is narrowed to what's most important to us, which will always be the people we love. Our perspective on our life becomes as true as it ever had been in that second to last breath. It's our moment of clarity, our opportunity to reflect on the truth of who we are and how we have been experienced. It's in that breath that we experience true perspective. One of my favourite shows of all time is I Shouldn't Be Alive, which details reenactments of real-life events of human survival against the odds. Across all episodes, when adrift at sea, left for dead in a canyon, lost in the Amazon, or dying of thirst in the desert, every recount describes this moment of clarity in a very similar way. Of course, they all lived to tell the tale, but not before they faced their impending fate. They all described the overwhelming sensation of believing they would die and how they'd reflected on their families in that moment. Amongst all the noise, they were able to obtain true perspective, enabling them to get clear on what was most important to them. You might be thinking that true perspective sounds powerful, but you'd rather not face death to achieve it. Similarly, if you had the choice, you'd rather not wait your entire life to experience true perspective on your second to last breath, right? The truth is, you can experience it at any moment, but we tend to miss the subtle cues and only pay attention to the obvious ones. Like when our life is in danger, it seems the significance of the threat is directly proportional to our ability to be present in the moment and focus on what's most important. As a person and as a leader, it's your job to achieve and maintain a fierce presence that enables you to connect to yourself and others. In corporate speak, this might be called executive disposition or charisma or gravitas. Whatever you want to call it, it starts with an internal knowing and clarity that enables you to stay in the moment. Moments of truth. Whether it happens early on or later in life, you will experience a moment of truth where life decides to kick you while you're down and you'll question whether you've got what it takes to get up again. I don't mean to sound dramatic by using this turn of phrase, and I also don't want to sound corny, but it's the simplest way to describe it. I'm talking about a moment where you step outside of yourself and realize how insignificant you are in the bigger scheme of things. That important deadline you were working toward, the train you just missed, the business deal that didn't come off, the argument you just had with your partner, the team you lead, the job you have, your money or lack thereof, none of it matters. In this moment, as you read these words, you are as insignificant as you ever will be. And yet, the significance of this moment is the opportunity it presents to change everything. This moment will always be available to you. It is the key to your ongoing evolution, how you experience the world and how the world experiences you. It is in this moment that you will experience every realization, epiphany, breakthrough, and feeling of joy or sorrow. This moment is but a grain of sand on a beach that represents life. This life is but a flash of lightning produced by a storm on a planet within a universe that is forever expanding. No limits, no boundaries, infinite. The ultimate significance and insignificance of this moment, along with your ability to recognize it as such, is the most powerful perspective you can have. True perspective. Having true perspective is about seeing yourself in this moment the way the rest of the world sees you. Looking at yourself from the outside in while building yourself from the inside out. This book is about understanding the significance of embracing your insignificance, which releases the shackles of expectation, fear of failure, and the need to please others. It's about having the courage to follow your heart and challenge yourself to be all of who you are in everything that you do. This book is about leadership that starts within you for the benefit of those around you. It's about leading with the truth. Who am I? I'm an organizational psychologist. I run my own business, which involves coaching and mentoring leaders, teams, and organization. My days are varied. I get to be creative, and I'm constantly being challenged to lift my game and enhance how I'm showing up in the world. I've got 4 kids and plenty of responsibilities. Most people, including me, are surprised that I opted for the challenge of working for myself and running my own practice. Well, I could bullshit you and say I carefully planned the launch of my business and had a healthy pipeline of work lined up with 12 months worth of buffer money in the bank. Of course, that would have been sensible. The truth is, I didn't have any of that. So, what enticed me to take such a big risk, put it all on the line and throw myself out into the world? Well, I got tired of lying to myself every day, pretending, not being honest with myself about what I was really feeling. I was a square peg in a round hole. Don't get me wrong, I had a good job. I got paid well and my career was shaping up nicely. I just didn't feel right. I had this annoying voice in the back of my head, constantly reminding me that I was holding back, not being real, playing a part in the life I expected I should have. Like an actor in a predictable soap opera. My internal experience is one of torment, feeling trapped in a role that I didn't really like, working with people I didn't really like, doing work, mostly that I didn't really like. Inevitably, it didn't take long before I was given some options by my employer at the time, and that was the moment, a moment of truth, where I got some true perspective. And boy, did I feel insignificant. The insignificance I felt was partially due to my shame. I'd known things weren't right for a long time, yet done nothing about it. I'd stayed in a job where I was miserable and stuck in my head in the sand, and all the hard conversations that needed to be had. However, in addition to some redundancy money, I'd managed to negotiate to take on a client upon my exit, so at least I had something to build on. I recall taking my sons away for a long weekend to decompress in nature before I stepped into the unknown of running my own business. Things were falling into place, and while it was a scary time, it felt right. That weekend, I felt free and expansive. The world felt abundant, and I had shed that horrible feeling of obligation that I'd been carrying around for the last few years. Finally, I didn't have to lie to myself. I'd taken a leap of faith and was leading with the truth, something I'd been yearning for a long time. What I didn't know at the time was the whole truth just hadn't arrived yet. Following the weekend away with my boys, I booked in a call with my first client to kick things off in my business. We'd already agreed on a scope of work, so the call was intended to get the project underway. To say I was excited was a gross understatement. This was my opportunity to create a new life for my family, taste freedom, and demonstrate my capability. I called the HR director at our agreed time, and the second she answered, I knew something was wrong. The tone of her voice said it all. She then delivered the news that the CEO was moving on, and the board had put a freeze on all discretionary spending. In that moment, I was frozen. The truth hit me like a truck. I was staring down the barrel of a complete and utter failure on my very first day. After the call, I sat in my home office, slumped in my chair, aimlessly staring out the window. I'd really fucked up this time. I felt selfish and ashamed. I also validated the guy who sticks his head in the sand to avoid problems. The annoying voice in the back of the head was saying, "Yeah, I told you so. You'd better get real about your options and stop living in fantasy land." I dreaded the conversation I'd need to have with my wife. I had no clients, not much money, and a lot of mouths to feed. As uncomfortable as it was, looking back on it, that shock was exactly what I needed. I realised how complacent, risk-averse and lazy I had become. I was a victim of my own lack of drive. All those years working in a corporate environment where I felt I wasn't growing or expanding because of the environment I was in, I was right, but I'd failed to realise that I had created the environment that was preventing me from growing and expanding. I was the problem. Like most people, I was my own worst enemy, standing in my own way, but I couldn't see myself until the moment of truth when I was jolted back into the present. It was as if I'd been unconscious and my heart had stopped, only to be brought back to life by the electric shock of a defibrillator surging through my body. However, like anyone who's been brought back from the dead, I wasn't in very good shape, and so it began. Fast forward 5 years and I'm still running my own gig. I'd be lying if I said it was easy. It's not. I am, however, doing work that I love with people I like, the way I want. My commitment to developing myself for the benefit of others, and of course myself, is stronger than ever. It's a work in progress, a living sculpture, if you will. I also want to point out that I still get in my own way, and I'm still my own worst enemy. The difference for me now is that I recognize it, and am aware of the mental trickery that I play on myself to not take action or make the changes required. It takes effort, practice, and a whole lot of true perspective. A guide to this book. This book captures my insights on the evolution of oneself through gaining true perspective. By sharing insights taken from my own experiences and those of others, I hope you will begin to see yourself more clearly. As an executive coach and organizational psychologist, I recognize the importance of bringing all of who you are to everything that you do, and that includes writing a book. As such, you'll find plenty of stories that I've either lived myself or observed in others. Hopefully these stories will enable you to connect more deeply to my content and make the whole experience a little more human. There are 3 main focal points in the book. 1. Understanding what perspective does for you and how you can benefit from having it. 2. Demonstrating how knowing, challenging and sharing yourself leads to new perspectives and growth. 3. Shaping how you view the world, and in doing so, how others view you. I also offer tools, questions and techniques to help you gain perspective, expand yourself and ultimately align who you are being with who you want to be. This book teaches you how to lead when life inevitably gets hard and why leading with the truth always wins. It's about playing the long game of leadership that incorporates every aspect of your life, personal, work and otherwise. If you're a leader, then this book is for you. By leader, I don't just mean CEOs and business executives. I refer to those with a burning desire to be heard, those who wish to fully express themselves with honesty, those who wish to create a legacy, those who want to align with how they want people to experience them. Perhaps you're at the beginning of your journey, or perhaps you're right at the end. Regardless of where you are, it's your self-awareness that will lead to the action, and self-acceptance that will lead to adaptation. If you're a coach or a leadership development expert, this book contains insights gleaned from my experiences as an executive coach, and will challenge you to be better at your craft. If you're a parent leading a family, this book will highlight the importance of leadership at home and how you influence your child's experience of the world, the successes they have and the decisions they make. In my work, I deal with parents, politicians, procrastinators, playboys, perfectionists, powerhouses, pontificators, psychopaths, philanthropists, philosophers, and psychologists. Regardless of the label I give them, they are all people. As a person with a heartbeat, I've written this book for anyone who wants to be better. I won't pretend that I have all the answers. I too am continually evolving, and have accepted that will be the case until the day I take my second to last breath. This book is written for those willing to do the work on themselves for the betterment of those who follow them. If you're more of a pragmatist, then this book will challenge you to think deeper and challenge yourself further to enhance your performance. For those willing to read on, I invite you to take a choice to step over the line, take a leap of faith, cross the leadership threshold, and discover how you can lead with the truth. Okay, so read that twice today. Unfortunately, I believe that captured the audio. So where am I standing with it now? It's interesting. as I was reading about this idea of true perspective, I talk of moments of clarity and the idea that I had my moment of clarity when I started my business and it all sort of fell apart before it really even started. And I also allude to the idea that we want to create opportunities to get more present to that sort of shock. I'm actually not quite sure that's possible because as human beings we tend to avoid it, um, and it's really difficult to fabricate or replicate consistently. So you could do it every day or think about your death, and that has a very stoic ring about it. Where the first exercise you do every day is consider that to be your last day, and that might give you this level of presence and intention for your day. Yeah, that could be one way. The other way people do it is they do extreme things like jump off a bridge, base jumping off a building, whatever it might be. They do crazy stuff, and that then enables them to get really present in the moment. Um, I don't think either of those are sustainable in a leadership context, and they don't really work because they're so far fetched. What is realistic, however, is to focus more on the question of how do you want people to experience you, right? So that concept of stepping outside of yourself is providing true perspective. And that's probably something I don't think I articulated very well in this book. Um, in reading it again, I think I focused too much on how do we give people those moments of truth and tap into moments of truth and get that level of clarity. And I think, you know what? Um, we're always evolving and changing in how we want people to experience us, and sometimes we don't know until we've had a go. Um, I mean, yeah. So that's all I'll say about that. So do I still resonate with the concept of true perspective? Absolutely. Do I believe that we need to shock ourselves with death or terrible events? No, I don't. I think it's more about taking that opportunity to reflect on how people are experiencing you, maybe before you say or do what you're planning to do. And that is the key, absolutely key. Step outside of yourself and demonstrate leadership in that regard. And then it's a choice, right? You're choosing, regardless of whether you believe that's going to be negative or positive, you're choosing to move forward with that behavior. So that is the leadership you're demonstrating. Interestingly, since I wrote the book, my uncle Bruce, he's still alive. He has been diagnosed with dementia, and so he can no longer remember who I am, and certainly wouldn't remember the conversation that he had with Dad. So that was a what if that I didn't consider. What if my uncle suffers from dementia in 2 years and won't even remember this conversation? So there's an example of, regardless of the scenario that you come up with in the what if game, it really is about the intention and energy you invest in the potential outcome. So, an exercise you can do with what if is literally list as many negative what ifs as you can, and then as many negative what ifs, list as many positive what ifs, as far fetched as they seem. And then you have to expel the negative ones because they're not helpful, and focus in on a realistic positive one that you've come up with. And that's the one that you redirect your energy toward. So that what if game is, I think that is even more powerful now than when I wrote the book and first thought of the concept. Of course, and I talk about the problems and the challenges that I was facing at that moment 2 years ago. I've had some shit go down in my world in the last couple of years that, haven't been great. And, so absolutely, we're forever and always challenged with the necessary step to create a positive what if scenario. Otherwise, you end up depressed. You go down this horrible staircase to the, bottomless pit or the abyss of just nothingness. So it's not useful. It's not helpful. Some people like to talk about scenarios and say, oh, I like to be a pessimist, so I'm never disappointed. No, pessimism, which is constantly reiterating the negative, will lead you nowhere but depression. So if you actually want to feel somewhat happy and somewhat fulfilled, then I highly recommend investing your energy in the positive what if as an outcome. What else? Change is death. Yeah, the Brett Wiley thing. Yes, that's I think there's some wisdom in that, in terms of moving on and challenge oneself to let go. My personal story of just stuffing up in my business. Yeah, that was. I remember it was pretty shit. And that was just validating my experience and a reminder of from whence I came. And this concept, I think so many people out there, and probably some of you listening to this, are struggling with that feeling of lying to yourself, showing up in a way that you feel you have to, based on an expectation of yourself or that of others. If you're in that space and you've got that yearning to experience more or step outside of the expectation that you've placed on yourself or others have thrust on you, I strongly encourage you to do that. I'm not saying throw it all away and quit everything. I'm saying give yourself the time and space to explore what that lie to yourself is all about. And then, rather than acknowledge that lie through feeling shameful or disappointed, start exploring the what if scenario around feeding that part of you that doesn't feel like a lie. And we've all got that inside of us. Maybe it's just deep and it's buried far, far, far down there. But if you start investing in that, what could potentially happen? So there you go. That is the introduction. Our next reading will be the first chapter, or part 1, Understanding, which starts with what is true perspective, chapter 1. So that'll be the next installment. I hope you enjoyed that reading, and I look forward to sharing more with you.